mentor to talk to her about pedagogical skills and classroom design, and class design rather, pedagogical skills and class design for each one of her sessions. And the idea was that the mentor would be here in person to participate and observe. And so we're very glad to welcome Dr. Joyce here today. And if you want to know more about her bio, you can find from I think there should be either sheets or if you want to have my actual site. I also want to make just quickly note that even though this is number 3 out of 4 for this year, our applications are open for next year's fellow. And so if you know somebody who is appropriate, please send them to my website for the application, for the description of the program and for the application. I also want to note that this program is funded outside of my normal operating budget. So first of all, thank our donors who make this possible this year, and also if you've been enjoying that, if you're interested in the concept that we're working on here, I want to encourage you to feel free to make a contribution to help us make next year possible as well. And without further ado, Miriam will really excited to welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and bracing the cold. I just had a nice break compared to yesterday. So I appreciate everybody coming out. I'm excited to learn with you. I feel so comfortable already. It's my 3rd time. So I want to start off. We're going to talk about David today. David and Tanakh, David and Rabbinic literature. And I want to just start off with sort of a broad question for you. What are your impressions of David? What do you know about him? Good, bad, evil, amazing. Let me get some thoughts. What do you know about David? What do you think about him? What did you say?
He was handsome.
Handsome. Okay, great. What else?
Humble beginnings.
Humble beginnings. Yeah.
Very Christian in general.
Multifaceted Renaissance man. Great.
His emotions run the gamut. When he's excited, he dances with joy, and when he's
Passionate, emotional.
Passionate, when he's upset and sad, when his son has died, he's not consolable. He writes his songs. He's got every emotion.
Great, emotional. Great.
He believes in Hashem. Which we know from just talking about what's going through my mind, it's not so obvious.
Right, not so obvious, especially with the monarchy and and he believes in Hashem. Yes, that's very important. What else?
He had a troubled childhood.
Troubled childhood.
His family was obsession and his origins were questioned.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Good.
He comes from the roots, right?
He goes what?
He comes from the roots.
Good. Yes. That's coming up in a few months. Good to keep in mind. Anything else?
Parents is somewhat questionable.
Right. So one thing that didn't come up, but we're actually going to talk quite a bit about tonight, is the story of David and Bathsheba. That story, I think, is pretty well known, but I will have you sort of look at the text before we actually get into rabbinic literature. But I think, taking all of these comments together, David is a complex person, lots of different facets, different features. We know a lot about his background, his family life, his kids, his wives, his battles. We know a lot about David. We have lots of books written in Tanakh about him. Shmuel Aleph, Shmuel Bet, Tehillim we associate with David. We have a lot on David. And I want to I'm just going to frame what we're going to do in this class and sort of relate it to what we've been doing in the previous 2 classes, where we're going to look at the character of David through some sources in rabbinic literature, and talk about how they might be seen, and we could explore them, using a lens of comedy or humor. And specifically, we're going to talk about parody or satire, and I'll get more into that later. But if you've been with me for the last 2 classes, you know that what we've been doing is we've been looking at rabbinic humor, and specifically we've been looking at laughter. And it's, when you want to talk about humor, it's easiest to find, well, where do people laugh? what's funny? Well, you look at what makes people laugh, and that's what we've been doing in the last 2 classes. In the first one, we looked at when Rabbi Akiva laughs. In the second one, we looked at laughter as mockery. But sometimes we can identify things that are funny or humorous or comedy, but don't necessarily incite laughter. Sometimes you'll see, a satire or parody specifically those genres, I think, that they're not always funny, but you can look at them and you can say like, oh, that's funny, even if it doesn't make you laugh out loud. And that's kind of the framing that we're going to use in these sources. I'm not sure that they're going to really make you laugh out loud. I don't know if the last source that is in the last class has made you laugh out loud either, but they made the rabbis laugh. And we're going to look at them sort of through this lens of humor and comedy, even if they don't make you laugh out loud. Now, I think this is true, by the way. Like, sometimes you watch SNL, and it doesn't make you laugh out loud, but sometimes it does. But you can say, like, oh, that was smart. That was, a smart comedy. So I think there's some, that'll be the sense that we get from some of these texts. But before we get into the rabbinic text, I want to explore David through Tanakh, through what it says in the actual biblical text, just so that we can get a sense of what are the rabbis working with. Because the rabbis know Tanakh backwards and forwards when they write their midrash sheet. So what we're going to do is we're going to try something new, which we haven't done in the previous classes before. We're going to explore these texts in Havruta, so with a study partner. You can either 2, 3 people, 4 people, whatever you're comfortable with. And what I want you to do is, you'll see the first section on your source sheet is called King David and Tanakh. It'll span the first, the first 3.5 pages. There's a lot of text here. You don't have to make it through all of it, and it culminates in the David and Bathsheba story, which is really the focal point of this lesson. So if you're going to get to anything, try to get to that. So spend 15 minutes reading through these texts, and while you read, I want you to have in your mind, what is the impression of David that we get from these sources? What does Tanakh tell us about him? What does the Tanakh want us to think about David? So think about that as you go through these sources, and then we'll check in about 15 minutes. And if you have any questions, please let me know. So go ahead, get up the Ruta, and we'll come back together in 15 minutes. Does that change what you thought of David initially? What are your impressions now of David? What does Tanakh want your impressions to be? Yeah.
I mean, some ways, I think we learned it as like this love story between David and Bathsheba, and it really seems like it's great. He's bringing her, it's almost like Esther with Asher. She's bringing her to the thing, he's raping her, then he kills her husband, then he forces her to marry him.
Yeah.
And then the crazy thing is God is punishing her yet again by killing her child. So it just seems like a really upsetting.
It is a very upsetting story, and I was discussing this with one of the others, was that when you know the story, but then when you read it from a more mature perspective, you're like, wait, there's no consent. Like, this is not the story that I remember learning. This, beautiful David and Bathsheba that meant to be. Like, it's a little tragic. It is, yeah.
Yeah, it's also as we were discussing, imagining why she was in the mikvah. I'm very curious, where where David was situated. Was he always looking into the ritual bath?
What is David doing? Isn't that cute? Why does he see her? What is he doing on the roof?
And it's snatch her. She just gets out of the mikvah, sending messengers, bring her over.
Right.
It's a little bit of just a little. Well, it doesn't. It just says she was just pure. It doesn't say. I'm assuming. This is in my mind. I don't know.
Got it. It's not clear that it's the mikvah, but there is a sense that she's purifying herself. So ritual purity, and the question is, why does the text want to tell us that? That's the other interesting question here. Why is that included in the text? Yeah. it adds like another layer of complication to this entire episode.
Could you please repeat it? You couldn't hear what I couldn't hear.
Do you want to repeat it?
I said that there was a limit to what he did wrong, because even though she was someone else's wife, she was ritually pure, and the text needs to tell us that. He didn't do that part of it wrong.
So he could be an adulterer, but it doesn't matter.
Right, so there's maybe like a limit on how bad it was, and the rabbis, we're actually not going to look at all of these sources, but the rabbis and their midrashim, they really, they'll harp on this fact that she was ritually pure. So at least she was pure, as if that makes everything better. Any other reflections? Yeah.
I was wondering whether you're getting at, when we see him with Shaul, he's kind of obsessed with the honorable.
Yeah.
And then he wants to be doing a Sheva story.
Yeah.
And instead of she's so far, okay, so that's also like that's something that's honorable.
Yeah.
And then he switches places, and then Uriah refuses to go back to his own house because he has to be honorable and stay
Yeah.
outside the castle because all of his friends are still at court. It's like a favorite place to choose.
Right, that's really very interesting.
So
Maybe.
you repeat it.
Sure, yes, thank you, yes, I will repeat, again, it's a big room. Yes, you're saying about honorable, that there's this theme of honor that's maybe running through the text, and in David's early life, maybe he was really concerned with being honorable, and then maybe he doesn't keep it as much with the Bathsheba story, but maybe with the, Tahara, with the purity he does, but it seems that Uriah becomes the one who really is concerned with the honor and being, being on top of that, and it seems like they almost switch places a little. So maybe there's a sense that once you get a lot of power, I don't know, certain things slide by the way, which I think is probably true in this sense. And also, I wanted you to see those early sources, because when you just look straight at the David and Bathsheba story, and you don't look at what comes after, you don't look at what comes before, your impression might be, wow, David is not the greatest of kings. Like, why is the Mashiach going to come from David? Why is the whole Davidic dynasty the most important thing in Judaism? Like, this is kind of weird. But when you look at the entire context holistically, David was really humble and all those things that we said in the beginning, subservient to God, a really good person and a good king at first, and then he had this lapse, and then he acknowledges his sin immediately. It makes David a very complicated figure. Yeah.
Going to say he's deceptive. I mean, he realizes he's done wrong with
Yeah.
Bathsheba.
Yeah.
It encourages Uriah to go back home and sleep with her.
Yeah. He recognized immediately, and that's the cover-up, right? And then when he gets forced to face it, then he acknowledges it and apologizes. Yeah.
But no, and then he gets into it.
Do those words, and he lay with her, does that mean he raped her? Because it doesn't say he took her. I mean, I don't know. What is the word that the Torah uses for when it's a rape versus,
Yeah, let's see.
maybe it was a consent.
So it's not clear. I wouldn't say that it's clear either way, and I think that the text purposely leaves it ambiguous. I don't think there are definitely cases where the text makes it clear that it's not consensual, and then there are cases where it's clear that it is consensual, and this is in the gray area, and I think that that's purposeful. Yeah.
So speaking of gray areas, one thing that we noticed is that after whatever the sin takes place, the sin is never, it says, made explicit. Like, it says that, this thing was bad in God's eyes, and then even in David's, prayers, my sin is before me always. And,
What sin? What are we talking about? Which of the 10 sins that happened in this chapter?
Yes.
Yeah, and it seems like it's the entire episode can be one sin, but there's also a lot of, if you really want to be halachic about it, there's a whole bunch of individual sins that are happening here. Yeah.
Just to feed off of what, I don't know, what is it?
Bella.
What Bella was saying.
Yeah.
In terms of Uriah's response
Yeah.
and the resistance to go home to his
Yeah.
wife, it does make you wonder, the king is telling you to go home.
Right.
Take advantage and enjoy
Right.
having some time with your wife, and so I'm not saying that it's a criticism,
Right.
but you do wonder what their relationship is.
Right. Right. what struck me with Uriah's response is he says, how can I go and be with my wife while the troops are, you know, in battle and the country and all of this is happening? And it's like, well, who is he talking to? A king who didn't go out to war, who's home, and who actually just did lay with his wife. So there is a sense of a little irony there, maybe. Yeah.
You know, whether it's consensual or not is the gray area.
Yeah.
But setting up Uriah to die is very,
Very much not the right area, yes. There's a cover-up scheme, and then he sends him to die. So that is clear, yes. Okay, there's so much more to say about this story. I wish we could just spend all this time, you know, just talking about the story in Tanakh. But really what I want to get to is how the rabbis look at David. So the rabbis are looking at everything that you just looked at. They see David as this complicated figure. He's not good, he's not all good, he's not all bad. He's human, which is what one of the Chavutot were saying. He's human. And the rabbis are aware of that. Now, what we're going to look at, and a couple of Chavutot said to me, you know, this is not really funny. Where are you going with this? And you're right. The text is not funny. It's ambiguous. It's a gray area. It's maybe even very bad in certain places. But what the rabbis will do is use humor or parody as a tool to grapple with a complicated, problematic text. And we first see that with these first two sources on your source sheet over here, under section 2, David and Rabbinic literature. We start with these, we're on page 4. We start with these texts in Bereshit Rabbah. Now, Bereshit Rabbah are midrashim on Bereshit, on Genesis, and this is on the section about Esav being born. So first, Rivka, right, she's pregnant with twins. She goes, Lidrashit Hashem, she's not sure what's going on. And then she gets this sort of prophecy that says, Shnei goyim b'mitznech. You have 2 nations in your womb. And the Midrash explains, Shnei goyim b'mitznech, ze mika'eh be'olamo, v'ze mika'eh be'olamo. You have 2 celebrated nations in your womb. One takes pride in his world, and one takes pride in his world. Ze mika'eh b'malchuto, v'ze mika'eh b'malchuto, Shnei ga'eh goyim b'mitznech, Adrianus be'umot, u'shlomo b'Yisrael. You have 2 celebrated nations in your womb. One of them is going to be Hadrian, and one of them is Shlomo. Hadrian, who's Hadrian? He was the emperor in charge at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, when many Jews, and this is in 135 CE, when many Jews were killed. We have the 10 martyrs at this time. Really a very low point for Jewish history at the time of the rabbis. So we have Hadrian over here, we have Shlomo over here. We have 2 hated nations in your womb. All the nations of the world hate Esav, and all the nations hate Israel. So already this Midrash is sort of placing, now David is not explicit here, but we're talking about the idea of the Israel king, the Davidic monarchy, right, the dynasty, Shlomo. We have sort of a comparison between Esav and the line that's going to come from Esav and the line that's going to come from Israel, from Yaakov. Now, does anybody know, for the rabbis, who does Esav represent? Rome. Great, and that's why we have Hadrian here. So we have Rome on one side, and we have Israel on the other side. Now, the next Midrash is going to make this even more explicit. What does it say? It describes Esav as Admoni, as reddish. Who else in Tanakh is described as Admoni? David. Great. So the Midrash is going to put these 2 together. Admoni, Amar Rabbi Abba bar Kahana, hu lo shofech damim. So Rabbi Abba bar Kahana says Admoni red because he's a shedder of blood through and through. V'kevan shera'a Shmuel et David Admoni dichtiv. When Shmuel first saw David, and it says ruddy, Admoni, as it says, they sent for him, for David, they brought him, and he was ready. Admoni, he was afraid. Maybe he is also a shedder of blood, like Esav. God said to him, with beautiful eyes, which is the end of the pasuk. Esav mida'ato hareg, aval zeh mida'at Sanhedrin hareg. Esav kills on his own whim. David kills with the sanction of the Sanhedrin, with the sanction of the court. What is the difference for the rabbis between Esav and David, according to this source. Yeah.
Obviously, the thought is that David, his killing is righteous, and certainly I didn't show in, but it talked about, well, everything that David did was because he had been, this story was because he had been moved to actually have this happen. The problem he had was he did it at the wrong time.
Right.
He didn't exactly do the right method. He sort of read between the lines something that wasn't there. So
Right.
all his intentions were good and righteous, but he did them in the wrong time and the wrong way.
Does this source say that? Does this source say that David, everything he did was good, but it was in the wrong time?
No, it just says it's righteous.
Does it even say it was righteous?
So he did it with he had the court, it was court sanctioned.
It was court sanctioned. He had the power of the monarchy behind him. It's not a value statement. It's not saying it was good, it was bad. I'm not saying that. Just had the power of the monarchy, of the government behind him. Actually, it seems that there's not so much difference between David and Esav. They're the only two characters, both described as Admoni, and the Midrash is sort of saying subtly that Shmuel was actually afraid that he's going to be similar to Esav. I think the rabbis in this Midrash are picking up on the David and Bathsheba story and the other stories about David and are reading it into this text. Yes, we know David is a problematic character, and we know that murder colors his life to some extent. But they're not going to go out explicitly and say, yes, David is like Esav. He's, an incarnation of Esav. No, and they don't believe that. But there is something here, that there's something between these two characters that unites them.
The word Admoni
Yes.
is so unusual. I don't know if it's used anywhere else or not, but it certainly begs this question.
It begs the
What are
question.
you going to do with this?
Yes, exactly. And the rabbis are definitely picking, they're not just reading something out of nothing. You're totally right. It is unusual to use the word Admoni, and for these two characters specifically. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
The one thing that the rabbis seem to be overlooking, Asa was out in the field killing animals and making food. Do we ever hear that Asa actually killed a person? We don't, and yet David didn't, when it was, Saul killed his thousands, David killed his tens of thousands.
Good.
So David killed people.
Great. That's
Asa-
a great point. Right. David actually in the text is actually killing people, where where Esav doesn't actually. For the rabbis, right, like we said, they look at Esav as an archetype. They look at Esav as the archetype of Rome. So for them, Esav is the paradigmatic murderer. And they see him, they read into Esav. So this is drawing on other midrashic motifs, right? That Esav is this shedder of blood. But you're right, in the actual text, he doesn't actually kill anybody. He wants to kill Yaakov at some point, but you're right, he doesn't actually. Yeah.
So I was actually, to build on what you said, unless it would be that Esav was also a leader of a community. Maybe, we don't know much about his nation.
Yeah.
He was a leader of a nation.
Yeah.
And there isn't any text to say that he was, a leader that was not supported by his nation.
Right.
Certainly we have the scene of his coming with his nation.
Yeah.
To be his brother. But so as far as we know, he's a leader of a nation also. So
He might also have government power.
That's what I'm
Right,
thinking.
right.
It's like, how can they compare it when
Right.
we don't really have
Right.
written text that says that he was not.
Right, well, I think all of these points even further support the idea that the rabbis are purposely making this, not even a contrast, a similarity between the two characters to highlight David's personality as somebody who could have this Esav side of him. Maybe he has that in him, and maybe it sometimes comes out, actually. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just that these rabbis here, at least in this midrash, are talking, they're still focusing on the murder
Yeah.
piece and totally overlooking the adultery.
Yeah. In this case,
In this case, at least.
yes, in this case they are, because I think they're trying to compare to Esav, and they're working on Admoni, which is the, shedder of blood personality.
They're trying to ignore that other piece.
Right, they're focusing on this one piece, yeah.
I can point out, even though it's not in here, we know that Esau's family was full of adultery and incest, and if you look at the genealogy of Esau's family, literally, the Rashi says everyone is mom's
So this is a very
It's
famous.
glossed over here, but it's a known fact that he wasn't innocent on that.
This is brought up by the Midrash. There are a lot of Midrashim that try to explain how Esav's entire family are full of adultery, incest, and murder. Like they really want to show that that's the case in Esav's family, and you can understand why if they see Esav as this, archetype of evil. So they do see him like that. Yes. So already, now I wouldn't call this, I'm not going to call this satire or parody, but there is something here that is drawing an incongruity for us. Like this is uncomfortable a little bit to already see David as a sort of similarity with Esav. That is a little uncomfortable for us, and it's already painting David in this gray area, in this light that maybe there's a little bit to say about David, that he's not all perfect. Now, before we get to the next text, I want to acknowledge that there is a strain of rabbinic thought that says anybody who says that David sinned is a sinner. David never sinned. This is one particular strain in rabbinic thought, and I think it gets taught a lot, but it's one opinion, and actually the continuation of the Gemara there says, oh, you only think that because you're from David's family, you're from the Davidic dynasty, and you have the power. You are the Nasi, because it was the family of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi who thought that. So there already is, even in that one section, we don't always learn the remainder of that section, there is a tension there. But I want to acknowledge up front that there is a strain of rabbinic thought that says David never sinned. But we're exploring the other, I would call this the majority perspective, that David is a complicated figure. So we're going to look at the next text. The next text, I think, really is going to hit home this idea of using a lens of parody. I'm putting this up front because I want you to think about it as we go through it, to explore David. What we're going to read is the description of a feast in heaven. It's kind of like this eschatological, messianic feast with all the patriarchs sitting at the table that the Gemara describes. And there's going to be a very interesting encounter that we read. This comes from Pesachim, so this comes in the context of the Gemara discussing Hallel at the Passover Seder. And Hallel, comes from Tehillim. So Tehillim is a natural connection to David. The rabbis assume David is the author of Tehillim, so it's going to bring us to talk about David. So I'll read it and translate. Darash Rab Abirah, Zmanin Amar Le, Mishmad Rabbi Ami, Zamin Amar Le, Mishmad Rabbi Asi. Okay, so they're very concerned with saying whose name it was setting. Rabbi Abirah lectured, sometimes saying in the name of Rabbi Ami, sometimes in the name of Rabbi Asi. Okay. My Tativ, Vaydal Shekeled, Vaygamel, Vayasar Ham Shtegado, Vayam Gamel, Et Yitzchak. So what is meant by this pasuk in Bereshit? And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. My tu Vayam Gamel, Et Yitzchak. What is meant on the day that Isaac was weaned? Higamel. I think the Gemara's question over here is, why does it say Gamal twice? Vaygamal Hayelet, Vayom Higamel Et Yitzchak. It's a little curious, and we also have it seems like two different tenses actually. Vaygamal sounds like in the past he was weaned. Vayom Higamel Et Yitzchak could also be read as a future tense, and I think that's what lets the Gemara go into this futuristic vision that it's about to paint. So we're asking a question, we could call this an exegetical question. A question on the Pesukim. Why does it say, what does it mean by Yom Higamel Et Yitzchak? What is this party that was created on the day that Isaac was weaned? So now we describe. Atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lasas U'da L'Tzadikim Vayom Shegomel Chesed Im Zar'o Shel Yitzchak. In the future, God will make a great banquet for the righteous on the day that He rewards the seed of Yitzchak with His loving mercy. Gomel. Right? We say Gemilut Chasadim. That's the same word as Higamel, Vaygamel, as that he was weaned. So we're playing on the word, which is very common in Midrash. The rabbis are saying, the party of the weaning of Yitzchak is really a party to celebrate all the chesed, all the Gemilut Chesed that God bestows on the nation of Israel. There's going to be a big party one day in the future. Notnin kos Abraham. After they eat and drink, they'll give a cup of wine to Abraham to bless. Now this we do, right? We do this at the Seder. We do this at a Shabbat Brachot. You can really do this whenever you want if you have a minyan, or 3 people really, where you do a Birkat Hamazon al Hakos, right? You say the Birkat Hamazon and then you bless on a cup of wine after. It's kind of a celebratory custom to have. So they're doing that. So they pass the cup to Abraham and they say, here Abraham, you bless. Amar lahem, en yavarech she'yatza mimeni Yishmael. He says, I cannot recite the blessings because Yishmael came from me. Okay. Didn't know that would disqualify him from the blessing. So they go to the next one. Notnin lo kos li'Yitzchak. Amar lahem, en yavarech she'yatza mimeni Esav. So they give the cup to Yitzchak. Okay, Yitzchak, you bless. And he's like, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it. Esav came from me. I'm not eligible. Okay, so let's go keep going down the line. Notnin kos li'Yaakov levarech. Amar lahen en yavarech shenasati shte achayot ubat haTorah va'asra alav. So they give it to Yitzchak, to Yaakov. And Yaakov says, no, I can't bless because I married 2 sisters in their lifetime. And he even says, I know that it wasn't illegal at the time, but the Torah came later and then prohibited it. So I'm not eligible to bless. Okay, everybody's disqualifying themselves. Notnin lo kos Moshe levarech. Amar lahen en yavarech shelo zachiti l'kanes la'eretz Yisrael v'lo b'chayai v'lo b'moti. So they give it to Moshe. They say, Moshe, you bless. So he says, no, I can't. I'm not eligible. I wasn't able to enter Israel. I never got to. Not in my lifetime and not in my death. I can't bless. I'm not eligible. Okay, moving along. Notnin lo kos li'Yehoshua levarech. Amar lahen en yavarech shelo zachali ben. So they give it to Yehoshua. And Yehoshua says, no, I can't bless. I never had a son. Which also is not really clear from the Pesukim. But he says, I didn't have a son. I'm not eligible. Okay. Everybody is disqualifying themselves. Now, Notnin lo kos leDavid levarech. They give the cup to David to bless. What do we expect David to say? Yeah, I can't bless because I did adultery and I killed and I did all these things, right? Okay, let's see what he says. Amar lahen, ani avarech, velina el avarech. Yes, I will bless, and more so, it is fitting for me to bless. Shene'emar, kos Yeshua tasar, Hashem ekach. And he quotes from Tehillim, I lift the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord. Is this a surprising response? Yes, unusual. And I'm glad we're even laughing from it because it's not necessarily funny, but I think it kind of is. And I think the rabbis know that. I think they are purposely creating this situation where there is very clear incongruities. Now let's lay out.
Also quoting himself.
He's like, yes, this is why I know that it's appropriate for me because I wrote this thing. This thing. Right, it's like, I can't wait to get to that stage where I can quote my own papers.
But I also feel like you're like, no, I set this all up from the start. The rest of you weren't smart enough to put this.
It's like I knew it. Exactly. Yeah, so let's lay out some of these incongruities, right? We have the incongruity where we have David versus all the patriarchs. And all the patriarchs excuse themselves from blessing, and David does not. So already, without even getting to the reasons, already that's kind of odd. The idea that they're also humble is very much in line with rabbinic values, Jewish values, right? We excuse ourselves, we're humble. Maybe the patriarchs are being a little too humble, we can talk about that. But David is decidedly not humble here. He is pretty haughty, actually. And that's incongruous with Jewish values, rabbinic values. We know how much the rabbis despise arrogance. So that also is kind of weird. That's a weird tension. They all admit their sins that they have. And actually, if we look at the sins of the patriarchs, none of them are really their own doing, right? Abraham and Yitzchak both excused themselves because they had a son who wasn't chosen. Is that their fault? Did they choose to have Ishmael and Esav? And right, Moshe says, no, I didn't come into the land, so I can't. These are all things that are not really their fault. David, on the other hand, has a lot of sins up his sleeve that are actually his fault. So if you want to look at it like that, that is also kind of strange. And David's sins very much involve his family life, which almost all of these are about. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yehoshua, they're all about the sons that they had. We know that the remainder of David's life, right? Like, there's a lot of problems with, we know Amnon and Tamar and his sons who try to rebel. There's a lot of problematic family life that goes on with David. So there's a lot of irony and incongruity in this text, which I think forces us to read it as a parody, as a satire. The rabbis are saying, we know that David is not qualified. This is how we're going to talk about the David story. David maybe isn't the most qualified. He didn't have the greatest, track record. And we know that. They're subtly mocking. I wouldn't call this mockery like we did in the last class. This isn't straight out mockery. There's a subtle mockery. And that's what I think parody does. It doesn't say straight out, this person's evil. It allows you to have thoughtful, constructive conversation about the subject without flat out dismissing it. Now, I think this idea that there's all these incongruities can be even further highlighted, and I'll just quickly, I won't read this full source, but the next source, which comes from the page really right before, talks about Israel, the nation of Israel, and they use the same perek from Tehillim that David uses, and they say, I'm reading the last line in bold, they say, even though I am lonely in mitzvot, it is fitting for me that I should be saved. This is Israel. It's even more incongruous. David should have said something like this. Yes, I sinned, but okay, it's fitting, I can do it. No, he didn't say that. The rabbis are really setting up a tension. They want us to read it like this. Now, what does this parody accomplish? Is it a flat-out critique, right? But no, I think what I'm suggesting is that's not a flat-out critique of David. There's something more subtle. Now, to really explore that, I want to look at the last source. The last source comes from Bava Metzia. And it's this really interesting text. In a lot of other midrashim, the rabbis picture David as kind of like a rabbi. He sits in the Beit Midrash, he learns, he's very learned, and so that's how they picture him, and this is one of those texts. So, Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, no chol adam she'avo al safek eshet ish, ve'al yobim pnei chavero berabim. It is better for a person to engage in intercourse with a woman whose married status is uncertain, better than humiliating another person in public. So from where we know this, so from Tehillim, where it says, when I stumble, they rejoice and they gather over me, they tear at me and they do not cease. So David says before God, Amar David לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא, ריבונו של עולם, גם לא ידוע לפניך, שאם היו נקראים בשרים, ולא היה דמי שוטט בארץ, ולא עוד, אלא אפילו בשעה שעוסקים בנגעים ואוהלות, אומרים לי, David, הבעל אשת איש, מיתתו במה. So David is talking to God. He said, you know that if my tormentors were to tear my flesh, my blood wouldn't even flow to the ground. What is he saying? Let's continue. When they are engaged in the halachot of lepers, swords, and tents, meaning tum'ah taharat, a very niche, obscure topic that has nothing to do with any, real-world ethical applications for the rabbis, they say to me, David, one who engages in intercourse with a married woman, what is his form of execution? Imagine all the rabbis are sitting together, they're talking about tum'ah, and they turn to David and they're like, David, so tell us, adultery, what's the punishment for that? Okay, so what does David say? V'ani omer lahem mitato b'cherek. Yes, the death is by strangulation. V'yesh lo chelek le'olam haba. But he has a share in the world to come. Aval hamalvin et pnei chavero berabim, en lo chelek le'olam haba. But one who humiliates his fellow in public does not have a place in olam haba, in the world to come. So they turn to David, they say, what's the punishment for adultery? And he says, the punishment is strangulation, but somebody who humiliates another person doesn't go to olam haba. So Zami here is both humiliated, but also seems to emerge in a superior position. I think this text gives us a window into the rabbinic mindset about David. The rabbis are the authors of this text. So what are they trying to say? This is almost a double parody. It's a parody of David, right? They picture him like this. The rabbis kind of like make fun of him. Like, David, what's the punishment for an adulterer? But then they make fun of themselves. Because what do they imagine David doing? They imagine David turning back on the rabbis and being like, yeah, well, what's the punishment for somebody who embarrasses somebody? The rabbis are very sophisticatedly using this genre of parody and satire, not only to satirize David, but to do it to themselves also. To look deep into themselves and explore, how do we talk about David? How do we talk about the sins that David did in his lifetime? And how are we supposed to engage with that? So they really use this idea of, they rabbinicize David. They look at David through this lens of satire to allow them to explore the character of David in really a subtle way, to explore the sins of David, but also explore themselves, also explore their own sins. So I know we're running out of time, so I really just want to summarize and offer some takeaways that we can think about, and then we'll open it up for questions. What does parody and satire do? Why are they effective? I think what makes parody so effective is that it's a way of talking about something complicated without being so explicit and overt, without flat out getting up and saying, this is wrong, it's a very different way of moralizing. So like you can think about a late night comedy show, right? Like SNL, it makes it very low stakes. It's funny, it releases tension, it releases energy. It allows you to explore ideas in a kind of like a non-threatening way, right? They're not dismissing David. They're not saying David is all bad. But this allows them to explore the challenges associated with David without being too critical and without being too harsh. And without being really too offensive. It's hard to really offend somebody like this. I mean, it's not so hard, but I think that this is a way of them sort of not being too offensive, but still being approachable and effective. And I think that this use of humor makes it very accessible and approachable. It allows learners to feel comfortable saying that, yeah, maybe David didn't do the most amazing things, and that's okay. We can still have him seated at the table with the patriarchs, but we maybe know that there's something a little bit off there. But it's okay, we can hold both of those in tension. This is very different from an approach that says, no, he did one bad thing, that's it, he's out of heavenly table, we don't accept him anymore. The rabbis don't take that approach. They're able to look at David in that way. And in the last source, right, we saw that the rabbis are able to look at themselves, to look inward and say, what does it say about us when we talk about David? When we criticize David, what does it say about us? Now, I love this because I think the rabbis really are doing this double parody where they're saying, yes, we know, okay, we can make fun of David, but then what are we doing about ourselves? Then they make fun of themselves and talk about how they talk about David. Using these tools of irony and parody allows the rabbis to explore themselves and to bring it back. Remember, we talked about Esav and David? When they compare Esav and David, they're not just comparing David with Esav. Who are they comparing with Esav? Themselves. They are the children of David. If they say, yes, David, our forefather, he is similar to Esav, well, what are they saying about the children? Well, maybe we're similar to the children of Esav. There's a very deep level of recognizing who you are through the characters of Tanakh. That's why I love in the beginning, right, when you said that David is human. Yes, because we are all human, and the rabbis, they can criticize David, but they see themselves through David, and that is really very important. So when we talk about satire and parody, I think it could be a very effective and useful and crucial tool to talk about the ills of society, to better society. But we also, as the rabbis are showing us through their use of it, they also must not just belittle a person and an institution, but allow us to explore deeply and have real, deep, thoughtful conversations about it and about ourselves without completely dismissing a person. We have to use it as a tool to both explore the world out there, and the world in here. And I think that is what the rabbis are doing through David. So that's what I wanted to say about David. Parody, I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions that you might have. Yeah.
Is part of one of the messages from both this and what we were talking about before of the comparisons that the rabbis want us to also sort of apply it going forward to the whole concept of judging others and we look at a situation and we are immediately ready to judge the facts as we see it, and maybe what this is saying here is we're not in that position. It is not up to us, and in fact, if we rush to do those kinds of judgments, very serious judgments, then we're really doing what's wrong. The whole idea of embarrassing the person is so odious to our faith and our philosophy that we need to be very careful about not judging and leave that to Hashem to judge.
And remember last time, in the last class, we talked about mockery, right? And we talked about how humiliation is such an important value for the rabbis, not humiliating somebody. So really, we have to be very careful when we humiliate another person. And they're really trying to teach that to us through these sources of David.
This was about humiliation, cuts both ways. I mean, we've had all these problems with sexual abuse by rabbis of children where nobody did anything and then it was allowed to continue. So I think, I mean, I understand what you're saying, that you have to be very careful, but I think there are times when humiliation is necessary. And another one is the not. That's another case where the husband won't give a get.
Good. I think there's only a time and a place for things. I think this is a model to use when we want to talk about characters in Tanakh, let's say. When we want to learn in an intellectually honest way, we want to look at our characters and our patriarchs and, analyze them from a place that is thoughtful and intellectually honest. And I would say that in the real world, it's more complicated when something's happening in real life. And I'm not making any statements about how to proceed with problematic characters in the real life. And I think you're right. It is very hard in the real world. Yeah.
So the Sasim, the feast that they're having, and that's a very interesting story. And I think that for me, I read it more like when I think about, what is the cardinal sin, let's say Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, any of them, those would not be the things that I would pick. I mean, not that, we're all flawed, and I appreciate that, and that's why I love Tanakh. But I mean, it's interesting that, like, in some ways, by putting these, like, sort of artificial, not really root sort of cardinal sins, to me, it seems like they don't have that insight or reflective, nature, like what they actually maybe did. Whereas David doesn't say he didn't do anything. He's just saying, I'm gonna, we've all sinned, nobody's perfect, and this is like, somebody has to take the leadership and take things forward, and that's how I read this.
I would actually argue that the rabbis purposely choose these sins for the patriarchs to highlight the contrast with David. These are sins that are totally out of the patriarch's control, and so it even highlights even more that these patriarchs are choosing things that we wouldn't even consider a sin, and then David can't even choose like his real sins. From that.
Full disclosure, this is one of my favorite stories. And I think we need to pay attention to the fact that this comes in the context of the whole discussion about Hallel. So we have a discussion about Hallel, and then we have this, which I think highlights what you're trying to say about
I actually really wanted to say that, so I'm really glad that you said that. The rabbis sort of assume that you just know all Tanakh by heart. So they know, yes, they want you to know that the previous pasuk is about that called Mulohi Alai. It's drawn on that same idea of Gomel Chesed. To say, of course, you know, if David said it, then it makes sense over here. So the rabbis, the rabbis are fantastic creators and literary writers of Midrash because they're pulling different pieces together from Tanakh. They look at Tehillim. They're able to create a narrative that is both authentic to Tehillim, using verses from Tehillim, and expresses values that they want to express. So there's this combination of reading Tanakh and also talking about their values. So yeah, they're definitely drawing on Tanakh. Yeah.
You know, in the last source, when they bring David into the room, so to speak, you know, first of all, it tells you something about how the rabbis thought of biblical interpretation. The people were real; they were among them, right? And they also bring up the idea of the moral implications of reading. It's not stum. It actually matters a great deal how you read. And I also hear, like you're saying, the double parody. We are now critiquing them, right? And we're reading them, and it's almost like a hidden cautionary tale. Please don't humiliate us. Right. You're going to. Everybody does take the question and say they're so outlandish and difficult and whatever, and they're hinting to us. They know that they're going to be the next.
Yes, I love that. I think that's such an awesome way to read it. Reading is such an ongoing process. The rabbis are reading David. We are reading the rabbis. We're reading David. There's this complex thing going on. And yes, you're right, the rabbis recognize that. We're a layer in this process. Like, be generous how you read us. I think that's great. Yeah.
Gilad Altshuler mentions that the story with David and Abigail.
Yeah.
Abigail was sort of teaching David, you know, don't go and kill people, like don't kill the husband. And that was very, very important. That often in Tanakh it's the women who are teaching the men sort of to calm themselves and how to behave.
Right, that is really interesting. I think that, yes, I'm thinking about how Midrash uses that also, and I think that it does pick up on some of those gender things between the men and the women, so I think that that's a really good point, yeah.
Yeah, I like this little stuff you see the last part of it, the humiliation, because it allows, God says, somebody you're not going to make a mikdash because you shed blood, right? And it doesn't include any of the other things, just specifically that. The rabbis take license to talk about the other stuff.
Yeah.
By also using humiliation and you know, even though like modeling was already said, like we only talk about shedding blood. Right?
Yeah.
But no, they go further and then they turn it on themselves, so it's not right.
I'll actually add something else that I didn't put on the source sheet, because I wasn't sure we would have time to get to it, but it's also really fascinating. The way that the rabbis look at David as a rabbinic figure, they say that one of the things that he is most known as a rabbi king is that he would look at the bedika cloths of the women and purify the women for their husbands. Like, that is the thing that David would do, and they praise him for that. So that also is like, no, especially in light of what we know about Bathsheba, that she was pure. I think that's another level of maybe, like, you could read it as maybe a tikkun, right? It's a fix that the rabbis are sort of giving for David. Oh, David did this bad thing with Bathsheba, but now he's this good, you know, purifier. Or you can read it kind of like what we're reading, a little bit of a parody. Like, they're exploring this idea that he had relations with Bathsheba when she was pure, and they're talking about that through this sort of like low-stakes way of describing David as this posek, you know, who's able to return his wives to their husbands. So again, there's another layer. There's a lot of other texts that the rabbis use, but I think that they fit into this picture of looking at David as a complicated figure through this lens. Yeah.
One thing that struck me in the middle was, even when Shmuel took one look at David and his writing, what is Hashem's answer? The David Yafeh Einayim.
Yeah.
It's, you know, when he's got these beautiful eyes.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering that, you know, so if you do sin, but you've got these beautiful eyes. I keep thinking about my husband who's gone and he said, sometimes he called his friends these horrendous names, and sometimes he would do things. You do that. But when you look at these puppy dog eyes, and you always forgive it.
Good. I think that really the physical characteristics are really more symbols into non-physical characteristics, right? He's Admoni, so he has this side of him, which is, you know, we know is maybe not the best side. He also has Yafeh Einayim. Maybe that's another side of him. complex. He's a human.
Just the complexity of David goes back to Judah.
Yeah.
Like the whole,
Go back to all our leaders.
Yeah. But the whole story of why did the origins of Mashiach not start with Judah, basically have a relationship with his daughter-in-law.
Yeah, so that's a whole